Ukraine is receiving the world's most modern self-propelled artillery next week. The first example is going to be handed over to the Ukrainians, while the Ukrainians have captured the first North Korean prisoners of war. But we'll talk about this as well as about international aid, as well as anything that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Ukraine attacked a storage facility in Rostov. It contained drones as well as artillery ammunition. It was struck on the night from the 9th to the 10th of January. Ukraine, according to reports, were initially using waves of drones to oversaturate the air defense and then Neptune anti-ship missiles that have a secondary land attack function to strike the target. They also struck the refinery in Nizhnekamsk. It is the 7th biggest refinery of Russia with a capacity between 6 to 8 million barrels a year. It was struck by likely Ukrainian drones, and the smoke has been visible. Fire is also visible. Let's switch to the developments along the front line. We go to the area of Kursk. Here, the Ukrainians have lost additional territory in the northwest. The Ukrainians have lost the towns of Leonidovo and Alexandria, which are up here. So now they are fully pushed away from Novoivanovka. Roughly that area has now fallen to the Russians as well. According to the Ukrainians, this success was achieved with massive attacks, 6 waves with in total 50 armored vehicles managed to push the Ukrainians back in this region. The Ukrainians are currently fighting back, though. They are attacking right now or they have recently attacked in Nikolaevka. We have a geolocation of this here, where Ukrainians are doing house-to-house fighting inside of Nikolaevka. They are also fighting is obviously also continuing in the region here. We have close to Ruskoye Perechnoye. We have the Russians having advanced to the west of the town. This is up here. So according to the map, the Russians would now be roughly at this point here, likely having extended their foothold and their control over this area here. This should now be under Russian control, or at least contested by the Russians. The Russians are also advancing in the town of Makhnovka. This is here. We have the geolocation here. This is in the south here. Here the Russians fighting has recently happened mostly in this area. Now the Russians have advanced. This is from the 10th, I think. From the 9th, the Russians have been here. And a day later, they have been up here. This video captured Ukrainians striking Russians, showing that they had advanced a further 250 meters inside of Makhnovka. They are getting closer in the direction of Sucha here from the southeast. That was it from the developments in Kursk. We switched to Kharkiv, and Kharkiv, the usual, nothing to report. Obviously, fighting is continuing, but not in an intensity that it changes anything. We go to the Eastern Front, and here the Russians managed to extend their bridgehead over the Oskil south of Dvorichna. It has now reached further into Dvorichna. The Russians had reached the town itself 2.5 weeks ago. Now they have taken big control over big parts of it. The western part is still under Ukrainian control, but the Russians now control the eastern part of Dvorichna. They also got close to Zapatne. Here they also advanced. So in the last situation report, the Russians had just taken over control over this forested area. Now they have advanced further towards Zapatne. According to the Ukrainians, the Russians still don't have an auxiliary bridge, a pontoon bridge or anything over the Oskil. They are only attacking with infantry in this region, but still advancing. The infantry is brought over the Oskil in small inflatable rubber boats. Right now they are not able to bring over wheeled or tracked heavy weaponry to the western side, but still they are advancing as of now. They, according to the Ukrainians, are attacking with bigger groups than usual in the region because of bad weather. Obviously, bad weather will diminish the effectiveness of drones in both strike as well as reconnaissance capability, and that allows the Russians to concentrate bigger troops and thus overwhelm the Ukrainians more easily. That should be one of the explanations why they are successful here in this region. Further south, I have no change in territory that I can confirm of any note until we reach the Seversky Donetsk. South of the Seversky Donetsk, the fighting is continuing, but we now have mostly no change in territory except for one region. Here in the last situation report, I showed you that the Ukrainians had reached this part of the canal. Now in a fresh geolocation, we see that the Russians came back and pushed further west here. So the situation here remains fluid. If you see, this is the forested area that is here. So the Russians are now here, having pushed the Ukrainians back, or at least in the contested area where it goes both ways. They are now 2 kilometers west in regards to the last geolocation. Further south in Toretsk, the Russian advance is continuing with a worrisome geolocation, because we have the Russians seemingly almost north of Toretsk already. In this area here, as you can see, it's probably technically still a part of Toretsk, but it's basically a small village in front of the city itself. Here, a Ukrainian bomber drone was striking ground targets. There are no visible Russian soldiers on the ground, so there could be some explanation for it that does not implicate a Russian presence at this point, but as of now it seems like the Russians have actually already reached the outermost part of Toretsk here in the northwest. They also managed to advance inside of Toretsk. We have fresh geolocations in the northwest itself, which would explain why they might already be up here. Geolocations are basically coming from most parts of Toretsk right now. Here in the northeast, there might be still some area held by the Ukrainians, but the majority of Toretsk should by now be in Russian hands. This is not all though, because the Russians are also now in Petrivka. We have geolocation of this as well. Recently, I've shown you that they have been here in Sherbinivka, and now they are on the western side at Petrivka, already north of Leonidivka, so they are advancing further to the northwest. Again, as usually, that doesn't necessarily mean full control over it. In this event, it was a mechanized attack by the Russians, which could theoretically have been defeated and wiped out later, but it shows that the Russians at least entered Petrivka during a brief period, showing that they keep advancing towards the northwest. We switch to the area of Pokrovsk, and here we have north of Solone, we have a territorial gain. Let me quickly check where that is. Solone is here, as you can see, southwest of Pokrovsk. We have the area here that was roughly this here, has now fallen to the Russians as well. We have a geolocation of this. As you can see in the open area here, the Russians are now present as well. The Russians were also successful in the west of Solone. We have a geolocation of this as well. Here, they were already in Solone and they are in Novovasilivka, but in the western part of Solone was probably still Ukrainian presence. Now it seems to have been pushed away here as well. Further south, we have the Russians in Yasenove. This is geolocated as well here at Yasenove. This is close to the northwest of Kurakhove, if we want it this way. So here at this point, the Russians have entered the town as well after taking Ukrainka. In the Kurakhove region, the Ukrainians have lost the town of Slovyanka here, and the Russians managed to advance further west of Shevchenko, and Kurakhove itself has to be considered fully taken as of now. Further west, close to where the oblasts meet between Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia, here the town of Velika Novosilka is under threat. The Russians claim that they've taken Neskuchne and that they've entered the northern outskirts of Velika Novosilka, basically indicating that the Russian presence would be, well, not this, that the Russian presence, okay, I need to quickly refresh, so that the Russian presence would be roughly like this here, that's a Russian claim. So as of now, there's no visual evidence that I've seen that confirms it. I do not see Ukrainians confirming that advance either, but the Russians are claiming they have advanced in this direction, and that's the situation we have here. Further west, I do not see any fresh change in territory, so that was it with the territorial changes. We have other developments though. First of all, we have here Media Zona. According to them, the tiredness of war is increasing inside of Russia as well. The elites are increasingly dissatisfied and frustrated by the way the war is progressing. Interesting though, they do not have the tiredness. They are not in a way as we would expect it from the Ukrainians, not comparable. They want the war to end, but quickly with a victory. So according to Medusa, which is an opposition media, the Russians elites are dissatisfied because Putin takes his time. They want an intensification. They want additional mobilizations. They want more war economy that would bring a quick victory and thus reduce the risk of long-running economic sanctions. But this would obviously mean high risks for the Russian government, as the dissatisfaction with additional mobilizations would put pressure on the Putin government. Then we have reports from Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian president and according to the Ukrainians, the first 2 North Korean soldiers have been captured alive. There was one captured before already, but he died fairly quickly after having been captured. Those 2 apparently are expected to survive and have been already brought away from the front lines. There is even rumors that the Ukrainian attacks recently might have aimed at capturing North Koreans alive, even though that does not convince me. That was far too risky mechanized attacks just to capture some soldiers. In the context here, doesn't fully convince me in this context here. But so this will likely mean we'll get additional information. So far, I have not seen the final proof. Obviously, they have Russian paperwork here, but we'll see over the next coming days whether they are North Koreans in fact. In troop generations, we have news from inside of Russia. Tula, the Oblast of Tula, is now offering 5 million rubles for a signature. So we see that the signature, the prize money for signing up with the military is continue to increase. The Russians are also increasingly using their fiberglass drones. The Ukrainians are saying they are getting used more and more. They are impervious to electronic warfare by the Ukrainians, but they are fairly slow and less agile than FPV drones, so they might be easier to defeat with ballistic weapons, basically with shotguns or anything comparable. Media Zone and BBC Russia have identified Russian soldiers that have died in war, in the war in Ukraine. They have now individually identified 88,055 Russian soldiers. This does not mean that just 88,000 have died. It means those are soldiers that have individually identified, which means this is the minimum baseline of Russian losses along the war. Likely, according to a lot of estimates, the Russian number is significantly higher. We've talked about it in the past, but this is the minimum number that is proven or more or less proven. This does not mean that this was all losses that Russia has suffered. Then we have developments along in the air war. We talked about it in the past, about drones, how they are developing. And I'm pretty sure I said it here too, that this is going to change innovation will continue, and that we will increasingly see air-to-air combat between drones. We've seen them ramming each other. We've seen some with sticks to damage the propellers. We've seen some ramming into bigger drones to blow them up. Now we have some kind of system to shoot down drones, as you can see here. This must be some kind of shotgun round. How it is designed is unclear to me yet. I'm waiting, obviously, for some visual evidence of the drone itself, because we do not see real recoil, and whoever has shot a 12-gauge shotgun knows that the small drone would definitely move quite a lot different than we see here. So they must have designed some recoilless system to use the drone in this way. Then we have further further developments in the political sphere. Here, Armenia has now started negotiations for a EU membership, European Union membership, clearly, obviously showing in which direction the country is orienting itself. And the incoming US President Donald Trump is now talking about negotiations lasting 6 months, no longer just 24 hours. As I said in the past, I always understood that as hyperbolically. No, what's the word? Well, I can't remember the words right now. I basically mean I understand Trump to always talk in exaggerations. So I never understood it to just him even claiming that it in fact will only last 24 hours. Now he's talking about 6 months negotiations. That seems a lot more realistic in the context of the war so far. International aid is also coming to Ukraine. A new US aid package was promised by the outgoing US president, $500 million in volume. It will include AIM-7 Sparrows that will likely be used in a surface-to-air missile role. It will include RIM-7, those are Sea Sparrows. AIM-9M, they could be used on the F-16s or in a surface-to-air missile road as well. New air-to-ground munitions, as well as F-16 support equipment and small arms ammunition. From Germany, there will be additional IRIS-T missiles that will be delivered, unknown number. Poland says they are preparing a new aid package, and 30,000 drones were financed for 45 million pounds. That's roughly 55 million US dollars by the UK, Latvia, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Sweden. The European Union has also given the Ukraine 3 billion euros out of Russian profits. So that's the frozen Russian money, and the profits out of that were given to Ukraine. And Ukraine receives the first RCH-155 in the next week. Now, the RCH-155 is the world's most modern artillery system. It's based on the Boxer wheel chassis, and as a unique feature, it can actually fire on the move, and is fully with its fully autonomous 155 millimeter turret and artillery howitzer. Ukraine will receive over 50 of them in the coming years, and now the first one is being given to the Ukrainians, but it is, according to what I found, it's not going to be given to them directly in Ukraine, so we will not see it appear in the next coming days. It's, according to what I see, it's being given to them for the start of training of crews on them inside of Germany. Before April 2025, it is not going to appear in Ukraine, and obviously then again, while it's the most modern artillery system in the world, it's in total, I think, 54 that are promised by now that are coming over the coming years. So it's supplement to the current existing, but it's not something that is going to decide the war by itself. Good news are from Czech Republic, though. They said that last year they managed to organize 1.5 million shells with their international initiative, and they plan to do the same again this year. So how well this is going to work out, we'll obviously have to see, but 1.5 million shells last year that they were actually delivered would obviously be fairly impressive. Norway is also aiding Ukraine once again, and in 2025 they promised over 2 billion euros for military aid for Ukraine, including investments in the Ukrainian defense industry. We talked about it in the past that the Ukrainians said they could produce 3 times as much. They simply don't have the funds for it. So now more and more nations are giving Ukraine money directly for its defense industry, which would be more efficient, obviously, and allow Ukraine to produce what they actually need, and all of this without range restrictions, strike restrictions, etc. But that was it already from me for today in this situation report. If you like this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, and leave a comment what do you think about the Western aid that is going to come fairly soon. At this point, I want to thank Sam Garcia for US Navy Pacific Fleet 1941, who sent me this via my Amazon wishlist, and to the unknown donor for Germany's French allies 1941 to 45. Unfortunately, it came without a sign, so I don't know who of you donated it to me, but thank you very much to whoever that was. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.